The beginning of the search. The sun was sliding down behind the minarets of the old city, painting the sky with streaks of amber and crimson. I walked slowly through the narrow alleyways, listening to the echo of distant prayers rising from the mosque. My name is Zayan, and at that time I was nothing more than a curious student of history, restless and always searching for stories hidden in places most people overlooked. My fascination had always been with the untold truths, the pieces of history people kept buried, sometimes out of fear and sometimes out of habit. That evening, I had just come from the central library, where I often spent hours wandering among books that smelled of dust and age. I liked to lose myself in manuscripts, in yellowed pages filled with forgotten voices. On one of those days, I stumbled upon a peculiar reference that would change the course of my journey. It was a brief note scribbled in the margin of an old manuscript. The manuscript itself was about Islamic jurisprudence, but the margin note caught my attention more than the main text. In faded ink, someone had written, "The matter of dogs is not as people claim. Seek the truth in the words of the elders." That single line lit a fire in me. I'd grown up in a household where dogs were rarely spoken of, except with warnings. I had heard since childhood that they were impure, that angels avoided houses where they were kept, and that one should not let them near prayer rugs. Yet the note suggested something different, something hidden. It whispered that there was more to the story, and I could not rest until I uncovered what it meant. I decided to start close to home. In our neighborhood lived an elderly man named Imam Karim. He was not just the imam of the mosque, but also the guardian of countless oral histories. People said he remembered things that even the books had forgotten. His beard was long and white, his eyes sharp despite his age, and his memory sharper still. I went to him one evening, carrying my notebook like a soldier with his weapon. "Imam Sahib," I said respectfully as I entered his courtyard, "may I ask you something unusual?" He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and patience. "You always ask unusual things, Zayan. That is why your parents complain that you spend too much time chasing shadows. What is it this time?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "I found a note in a manuscript. It said, 'The matter of dogs is not as people claim.' I want to know the truth. What do you know about dogs in Islam?" For the first time, his smile faded. He motioned me to sit down on the wooden bench beside him. The evening breeze carried the smell of jasmine from the garden, but there was a weight in the air. He folded his hands and leaned closer. "My son," he said slowly, "you have touched a subject that carries centuries of debate, stories both remembered and forgotten. People often speak with half-knowledge. They repeat what they heard without asking where it came from. But if you are serious, if you truly wish to know, you must prepare yourself for discomfort. The truth is not always what the world has told you." Those words sent shivers through me. He then began to speak in a tone that was almost like a story being unraveled. "Long ago," he said, "in the time of the Prophet, dogs were part of the landscape of Arabia. They guarded herds, they roamed the streets, they even appeared in the stories of Revelation. You know of the companions of the cave mentioned in the Quran, do you not? Their faithful dog sat at the entrance of the cave while they slept for centuries. If a dog was so unworthy, would God have placed it in such a noble story?" I nodded, writing quickly in my notebook, trying not to miss a single word. "Yet," he continued, "in other narrations you will hear warnings. Dogs licking vessels, the matter of ritual purity, the angels not entering a house with a dog. These narrations shape people's attitudes for generations. But there is more beneath the surface. Some scholars argued that dogs were not hated creatures, but rather misunderstood. They said the prohibitions were about hygiene, about circumstances of the time, not about the essence of the animal. Others, however, took the stricter path. Over the centuries, the stricter voices grew louder, and the gentler ones faded into whispers. And so people grew afraid, even of the mention of dogs. I leaned forward, my curiosity deepening with every word. "So you are saying there were differences, and people chose to remember only one side?" He sighed. "That is the tragedy of human memory. We cling to the harshest rules and forget the mercy that lies behind them." I knew a scholar once who told me something that stayed with me until today. He said dogs were never cursed. They were only made a test of compassion. Do you understand what that means, Zayan? I shook my head, eager for him to explain. It means, the Imam said softly, that our treatment of dogs was not about them at all. It was about us. How we treat the vulnerable, the misunderstood, the creatures that cannot defend themselves, is a reflection of our own souls. To be kind to them is to prove the mercy within us. To be cruel to them is to expose the hardness of our hearts. That is the truth most people do not wish to hear. His words sank into me like water into dry earth. For the first time, I felt the weight of something much bigger than a debate about impurity. This was about compassion itself, about the very measure of humanity. The Imam leaned back and closed his eyes. But remember, the truth is layered. You cannot rely only on what I say. You must walk the path, ask the people, read the histories, and see with your own eyes. Only then will you understand the shocking truth you are searching for. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed with the Imam's words echoing in my mind. Was it possible that everything I had heard as a child was only half the story? Could there really be a gentler truth hidden behind centuries of fear and repetition? The next morning, I decided to begin my journey. I told my parents I would travel to the nearby town of Rahimabad, where an old madrasa still preserved rare texts and where scholars debated even today. My mother looked worried, but my father nodded, saying, "Knowledge is worth the road. Go, but remember to return with wisdom, not just questions." I packed a small bag with clothes, notebooks, and my pen. As I left the city behind, I felt both fear and excitement. Fear that I might discover something people would not want to hear. Excitement that I might finally uncover the hidden layers of a story that had been buried for too long. On the road, I met travelers who carried tales of their own. A shepherd told me how his dog once saved his flock from wolves in the night. He said with tears in his eyes that he prayed for that animal every day, for it had saved his livelihood. A merchant from another town told me that his community kept dogs as guards at the gates, and no one thought of it as sinful. These small encounters added fuel to my determination. Clearly the matter was not as simple as most people believed. When I reached Rahimabad, I was greeted by the sight of ancient stone walls and winding lanes filled with vendors calling out their goods. The madrasa stood at the center like a fortress of knowledge. Its wooden doors were carved with verses, and its courtyard was alive with students reading under the shade of trees. I introduced myself to the head librarian, an elderly woman named Fatima, whose sharp eyes scanned me with suspicion at first. But when I explained my purpose, her expression softened. "You are chasing a dangerous truth, young man," she said. "But dangerous truths are often the ones worth knowing. Follow me." She led me into the archives where rows of manuscripts slept in silence. Dust danced in the air as she pulled out a collection of writings attributed to scholars from centuries ago. Some of the pages were crumbling, but their words still carried power. I began to read, losing track of time, and what I found in those texts would shape the next chapter of my search. Layers of forgotten history. The manuscripts spread before me like a sea of secrets. Some pages were faint with age, their ink almost dissolved into the paper. Others carried bold calligraphy, as if the writers had wanted their voices to shout across centuries. I sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor of the archive, with the sunlight slipping through narrow windows, painting golden lines across the old texts. Fatima, the librarian, sat quietly in the corner, watching me like a guardian. The first manuscript I opened was by a jurist, whose name I had only briefly heard in my classes. His words struck me immediately. He wrote that dogs were mentioned in the Quran, not only in the story of the companions of the cave, but also in subtle metaphors about loyalty and vigilance. He argued that while narrations about impurity existed, they were often about specific contexts, such as desert hygiene, disease, or ritual conditions. "Do not curse what God has created," he wrote, "for creation itself is a sign." I felt my pulse quicken. These were not the words of a scholar dismissing dogs as impure animals. These were the words of someone wrestling with deeper meaning. The next manuscript was from another scholar, but this one took a stricter stance. He wrote extensively about vessels licked by dogs, about ritual purification, about angels avoiding places where dogs dwelled. His words were filled with warnings. Yet even he admitted that dogs were useful for hunting, for guarding, and for protection. "They are companions in service, though not in purity," he wrote. I leaned back, my mind spinning. Here were two voices from the same faith tradition, both sincere, both rooted in scripture, yet painting different pictures. I realized then what Imam Karim had meant. The truth was layered, not black and white. Fatima walked over and placed another bundle of papers before me. "These," she said, "are letters between scholars of different regions. They debated with each other, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with anger. Read them, and you will see how human minds wrestle with divine guidance." I opened one letter and read the words of a scholar from Andalusia who argued that people had misunderstood narrations for centuries. He said dogs were singled out only because they lived closely with humans and could spread disease in those times. "When cleanliness is maintained," he wrote, "there is no harm. Mercy must guide our hearts, for cruelty to a creature cannot be justified by law." Another letter, written in response, was harsher. Its writer accused the Andalusian scholar of softness, warning that easing the rules could mislead the masses. "Better to forbid what may cause doubt than to open the door to negligence," he wrote. The debate was alive, fiery, and human. As I read, I felt as if the voices of the past were speaking directly into my ears. It was no longer just about dogs. It was about fear and mercy, about caution and compassion, about how communities chose one interpretation and silenced another. That evening, as the call to prayer rose through the air, I closed the manuscripts and stepped outside into the cool night. My notebook was filled with scribbles, but my heart was heavy. The shocking truth was not a single fact waiting to be uncovered. It was a tapestry of forgotten voices, each offering a piece of the puzzle. I stayed in Rahimabad for several days, speaking to teachers and students at the madrasa. Some repeated the strict warnings. Others whispered gentler views. One young student named Yasir became a friend during those days. He was curious like me, though more cautious. Over tea in the courtyard, he asked, "Why are you so interested in dogs, brother?" "There are so many other subjects you could study," I replied, "because the way we treat dogs reflects something deeper. It is not just about animals. It is about mercy, fear, and the choices our ancestors made. If the truth was hidden, it must be uncovered." Yasir thought for a while, then said, "My uncle keeps a dog on his farm. It guards the sheep from thieves. He loves that dog like his own child, but he never lets it into the prayer room. He says that is the balance God wants from us." "Do you think that is wrong?" I shook my head. "I do not think it is about right or wrong in the way we usually mean. I think it is about how we interpret what mercy looks like. Perhaps your uncle is closer to the truth than both sides think." We sat in silence, listening to the rustle of leaves in the night breeze. After a week, I knew I had to continue my journey. The manuscripts and conversations had given me knowledge, but knowledge alone was not enough. I needed to see the reality of dogs and people, not just in books but in life. I decided to travel to the countryside, where shepherds, farmers, and villagers lived closely with animals. There, I hoped, the truth would reveal itself not in ink, but in experience. I packed my bag again and said farewell to Fatima and Yasir. Before I left, Fatima placed a folded page in my hand. "Take this," she said. "It is a copy of a Hadith commentary that is rarely read. It may help you when others try to silence your questions." I thanked her and promised to guard it carefully. The road to the countryside was long and winding, passing through fields of wheat that swayed in the wind and villages where children chased each other in the dust. I stopped in a small village named Darak, where I heard there was a family known for raising dogs alongside their livestock. The family welcomed me warmly. Their patriarch, an old farmer named Rahman, had weathered skin and eyes full of kindness. When I asked him about his dogs, he led me to a shaded area behind his house. 4 dogs sat there, tails wagging, alert and loyal. "This one," Rahman said, pointing to a black and brown hound, "saved my grandson from a snake last year. That one chased away a thief." These dogs are not just animals to us. They are guardians. They are part of the family. I watched the dogs interact with the children of the house. The children laughed, hugging them without fear. I asked Rahman, "Do people ever criticize you for keeping dogs?" He nodded. "Yes, some do. They say angels will not enter my house. They say my prayers will not be accepted. But tell me, young man, can God reject a man who feeds his animals, who saves lives through their loyalty? I do not believe the Creator of mercy would despise what he created." His words struck me deeply. They echoed the Imam's voice, the manuscripts, and the letters. Here was a man who did not need scholarly debates to understand compassion. He lived it every day. That night I stayed in Rahman's house. The dogs barked whenever strangers passed by, keeping the family safe. I thought about how fear and protection were intertwined, how these animals carried both danger and loyalty in their very being. Perhaps that was why people argued so fiercely about them. Over the next few weeks, I visited more villages. In some, dogs were treated kindly, fed and respected. In others, they were chased away, feared, even stoned. One village elder told me, "We keep them away because they are unclean." But I remember my father saying that kindness to a dog is never wasted. Another villager said, "We fear them, yet we rely on them. They guard our sheep. Without them, we would lose everything." The contradictions fascinated me. Everywhere I went, people carried both reverence and fear in their hearts. It was as if dogs were mirrors, reflecting the inner struggle of mercy and caution within humans. One evening, while staying in a small inn on the edge of a forest, I met a traveler named Suleiman. He was older than me, with a rugged face and eyes that had seen too much. Over dinner, he listened to my questions and then said, "If you truly want the shocking truth, you must go further than villages and manuscripts. You must find the oral traditions that still survive in remote places. Stories passed from mouth to ear, stories not written in books because they were too uncomfortable. Where should I go?" I asked eagerly. He smiled faintly. "There is a desert settlement 2 days' journey from here, near the old ruins of Qasr al-Nur. The people there carry stories of a time when dogs were not feared but honored. If you are brave enough, go there. But remember, truths that survive outside books are often dangerous to speak aloud." His words ignited a new fire in me. I knew then that my journey was far from over. I would travel to the desert settlement, and perhaps there, hidden in oral histories, I would uncover the most shocking truth of all. The desert voices. The desert stretched before me like an endless sea of gold. The sun blazed high above, burning the horizon into a haze, and the sand crunched under the hooves of the camel I had rented for the journey. Each breath of wind carried with it both heat and silence, as if the desert itself was a keeper of secrets, unwilling to give them up easily. I followed the directions Suleiman had given me, guided by distant rocky hills that marked the settlement of Qasr al-Nur. After 2 days of travel, I reached the settlement, a cluster of mud-brick houses that rose stubbornly against the vast emptiness. Palm trees swayed near a small oasis, and children played by the water, their laughter breaking the stillness of the desert. As I entered the village, I felt eyes on me, curious yet cautious. Outsiders were rare here, and strangers asking questions even rarer. I introduced myself to the village elder, a tall man with a weathered face and a staff in his hand. His name was Malik, and he listened quietly as I explained my journey from the manuscripts of Rahimabad to the words of travelers and villagers. When I mentioned dogs, his eyes flickered with something I could not read. He gestured for me to follow him to a shaded courtyard where several villagers soon gathered. "You seek the truth about dogs in our tradition," Malik said, his voice deep and steady. "Then you must listen to our stories, for they have been passed down for generations. But you must also know that not everyone will agree with what you hear. Some will say these stories are dangerous, that they weaken faith. Are you ready for that? I nodded, my heart beating fast. I came here for the truth, even if it is uncomfortable. Malik began his tale. In the time of our grandfathers, dogs were not seen as curses. They were protectors, guides in the night, companions in loneliness. The people of the desert said that a man without a dog was like a traveler without shade. They spoke of dogs guarding camps from raiders, of dogs leading lost caravans to water. But they also spoke of something more. They said dogs had a place in the divine order, not as angels, but as reminders of loyalty. It was said that one of the saints of this land kept a dog that followed him everywhere. When he prayed, the dog sat outside the tent. When he traveled, the dog walked behind him. The saint said, "If God does not accept me, perhaps he will accept me for the loyalty of my companion." The villagers murmured as Malik paused. I felt the weight of his words settle inside me. Another villager, a woman named Zara, stepped forward. She had kind eyes and spoke with quiet conviction. My grandmother told me that dogs were once treated with honor here. She said people fed them from their own plates, believing that kindness to a dog would open the gates of mercy on the day of judgment. But over time, fear spread. Scholars from the cities brought stricter words, and people began to see dogs as impure. The mercy faded, replaced by suspicion. I asked, "Do people here still keep dogs?" Malik sighed. "Some do, in secret. Others drive them away. The conflict runs through families and neighbors. There are those who believe kindness to dogs is a duty of mercy, and others who say it is forbidden. This has caused quarrels in our community. You will see it for yourself if you stay." That night I stayed in the house of Malik's son, Hamza, a man in his 30s with a strong build and a serious face. As we ate bread and dates by the fire, I heard barking outside. I stepped to the doorway and saw a dog lying near the courtyard wall, thin but alert. It wagged its tail slightly when it saw me. Hamza frowned. "That dog is a stray. It comes here often hoping for scraps. My wife feeds it when I'm not looking, but I tell her not to. If people see, they will say we are unclean. Do you believe it is unclean?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "I believe it is a creature of God, but I also believe the warnings of impurity. I am torn between what my heart feels and what my mind has been taught." My wife, however, has no doubts. She says mercy is greater than fear. His words opened a door into the conflict I had been searching for. Here, in one family, was the living struggle between compassion and tradition. The next morning I walked through the village and saw how divided it was. On one side, children played with a small puppy near the well, their laughter pure and free. On the other side, an old man threw stones at another dog, shouting that it would bring curse to their homes. The villagers lived in two realities at once, each convinced they were right. That evening Malik gathered the villagers again. This time the gathering turned into a heated debate. One man argued fiercely, "The Prophet warned us about dogs. We must avoid them. Do you want angels to abandon our homes?" Another woman stood and replied, "The Quran honors the dog of the companions of the cave. Why do we fear what God has honored?" Voices rose, tempers flared, and I sat silently watching how this creature, humble and loyal, had become a symbol of something much larger. After the meeting, I walked out into the desert night. The stars stretched endlessly above me, and the silence of the dunes wrapped around my thoughts. I felt overwhelmed. Was the shocking truth that there was no single truth, only layers of human interpretation, fear and mercy battling through centuries? Or was there something deeper still, hidden in the oral traditions I had not yet heard? The answer came unexpectedly. A boy approached me shyly, holding a small bundle in his arms. When he opened the cloth, I saw a newborn puppy, trembling and blind. "My father says we must throw it away," the boy whispered, tears in his eyes. "He says dogs bring impurity, but I cannot do it. Will you help me save it?" My chest tightened. Here was the truth, not in books or debates, but in the trembling body of a helpless creature and the tears of a child. I took the puppy gently in my hands and felt its fragile heartbeat. "Yes," I said softly. "We will save it. That night I hid the puppy in my room, feeding it with milk Hamza's wife quietly brought me. The little creature pressed its tiny body against my palm, seeking warmth, and in that moment I realized the shocking truth was not a single revelation written in old texts. It was living and breathing, crying in the arms of a child who chose mercy over fear. The next day, whispers spread through the village that the outsider had taken in a stray. Some frowned, others smiled, and the debate grew louder. For the first time, I was not just an observer of the conflict. I was part of it. The revelation of mercy, the days that followed in Qasr al-Nur, were filled with tension. The villagers whispered about me and the puppy I had taken into my care. Some said I was a man of compassion who reminded them of forgotten teachings. Others muttered that I was a dangerous outsider, spreading softness that would weaken their faith. The debate about dogs that had long simmered beneath the surface now burned openly in every household. Malik, the elder, called me to his courtyard one evening. The air was cool, and the desert sky glowed with countless stars. He sat on a mat with his staff by his side, his expression caught between pride and worry. "You have stirred the hearts of my people, Zion," he said gravely. "Some thank you, some curse you. The puppy you saved has become more than an animal. It has become a symbol. But symbols can divide as much as they unite." I lowered my head. "I did not mean to divide your people. I only wanted to understand the truth," he sighed deeply. "Perhaps that is the nature of truth. It never comes without cost." The next morning, an argument erupted in the village square. A group of men demanded that the puppy be removed from the settlement. They shouted that angels would abandon them, that drought and misfortune would follow. Another group, led by Zara and a few mothers, argued fiercely that to cast out a helpless creature was against the spirit of mercy taught in their faith. The clash of voices grew louder, faces red with anger, until Malik raised his staff and called for silence. "We cannot tear our community apart over this," he declared. "We will settle the matter in council tonight. All who wish to speak will speak, and we will decide together." That evening, the entire village gathered in the courtyard of the mosque. Oil lamps flickered against the mud walls, casting long shadows across the crowd. I sat near the center with the small puppy curled against my lap, trembling yet calm in my hands. The first to speak was one of the strict men. His voice thundered through the air. "We cannot abandon the words of our prophet. He warned us about dogs. If we keep them, our homes will be forsaken by angels. Do you wish to invite curses upon us all?" Gasps and nods came from some in the crowd. Then Zara rose, her voice steady but filled with fire. "And did not the Quran speak of the companions of the cave, guarded by their loyal dog? Was that animal cursed or honored? Did not our prophet also say that a man who gave water to a thirsty dog was forgiven his sins? How can mercy be a curse?" Her words struck the air like an arrow. Silence followed, broken only by murmurs of agreement. Malik turned to me. "You have come from far, searching for this truth. Speak to us now. What have you found in your journey?" I rose slowly, the puppy still in my arms. Every eye in the village was upon me, and I felt the weight of generations pressing down. I have read manuscripts and letters from scholars who debated this matter for centuries, I began. Some were strict, others merciful. I've spoken to imams, librarians, farmers, and travelers. Everywhere I went, I found the same struggle. Fear on one side, mercy on the other. But what I have learned is this. The shocking truth is not that dogs are cursed or blessed. The truth is that dogs were made a mirror for us. They reflect what lies in our hearts. To treat them with cruelty is to expose our fear. To treat them with kindness is to reveal our mercy. The choice was never about the dog. It was always about us. I held up the puppy for all to see. This little creature has no power to curse or bless you, but your treatment of it has power over your own soul. If you choose fear, you darken yourselves. If you choose mercy, you elevate yourselves. That is the test hidden in the story of dogs. For a long moment, the courtyard was silent. Then slowly, Zara began to nod. Her neighbors followed. A few of the men folded their arms, unwilling to yield, but even they did not speak further. The weight of the moment pressed too heavily upon them. Malik finally stood, leaning on his staff. His voice was solemn. Perhaps this is what our forefathers meant when they told us not to forget the layers of truth. Perhaps we allowed fear to drown out mercy for too long. From this day forward, we will not cast away a dog that seeks food or shelter. We will feed them as we feed the hungry among us. And if one wishes to avoid them for purity, let him do so, but without cruelty. This is our path of balance. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some frowned, others smiled, but the decision of the elder stood firm. That night the village of Qasr al-Nur changed. Not all hearts softened, but the doors of mercy opened wider than they had in generations. I stayed in the settlement for several more days, caring for the puppy with the help of the boy who had first brought it to me. Together we fed it milk and watched as its tiny body grew stronger. The boy named it Aman, meaning peace, saying he hoped it would bring peace to the village as well. Before I departed, Malik placed his hand on my shoulder. You came to us seeking truth, and in doing so you forced us to see ourselves. That is the gift of a seeker. Do not stop your journey, Zayan. Carry this story to others, for mercy is a flame that must be spread, not hidden. As I rode my camel away from Qasr al-Nur, the desert wind carried with it the sound of distant barking. It was not a sound of fear or impurity. It was the sound of loyalty, of guardianship, of creatures reminding humanity of its duty to compassion. When I returned to my city months later, I carried with me not only manuscripts and notes, but also the living memory of the people I had met. I visited Imam Karim once again, placing my notebook before him. His eyes sparkled as he listened to my journey, from Rahimabad to Darak to the desert settlement. So, he asked with a knowing smile, what is the truth you found? I answered softly, the truth is that dogs were never a curse. They were a test of how much mercy we hold in our hearts. And those who pass that test find themselves closer to God, not further away. The old Imam closed his eyes and nodded. Then you have found what many forgot. Guard it well, for people will resist such truths. But know this, Zayan, mercy is always stronger than fear, always. As I left his courtyard, I felt the weight of my journey settle into my soul. The shocking truth I had sought was no longer a mystery. It was a living reality, and it was one the world desperately needed to remember.